At the age of 20, most men are still searching for their place in the world. But one man was about to conquer it. His name was Alexander. Born in a small kingdom on the edge of Greece, few could have imagined what he would become. He was not the strongest man alive. He did not command the largest army in the beginning. But what he had was something far more dangerous: a vision, a belief that he was destined for greatness. From a young age, he was trained not just to fight, but to think, to lead, to dominate. While other princes lived in comfort, he was being shaped into something else entirely: a warrior, a strategist, a king in the making. By the time he was just a teenager, he had already proven himself in battle: fearless, relentless, unstoppable. And then, everything changed. At just 20 years old, after the sudden death of his father, Alexander took the throne. Many believed he was too young, too inexperienced, too weak to hold power. But they were wrong, because what followed was one of the most extraordinary campaigns in human history. In just a few years, Alexander would march his army across continents. He would face the greatest empires of his time, armies larger than his own, kings more powerful than him. And yet, in every battle he fought, he never lost. From the rivers of Asia Minor to the deserts of Egypt, from the heart of Persia to the edges of India, his enemies fell one by one. Not because he had more soldiers, but because he fought differently. He moved faster, he thought smarter, and he led from the front, charging into battle, risking his own life again and again. Some called him a genius, others called him reckless, but no one could stop him. He didn't just win battles, he shattered empires. And by the age of 30, he'd controlled one of the largest empires the world had ever seen. But perhaps the most unbelievable part of his story is this: despite facing countless enemies, despite fighting some of the greatest armies in history, he was never defeated, not once. This is the story of the king who never lost a battle, the man who conquered the world, Alexander the Great.
Long before Alexander became a legend, before his armies marched across continents, and before his name echoed through history, the world he was born into was already in chaos. Ancient Greece was not a single united nation. It was a land of powerful city-states, each one proud, each one independent, and each one constantly at war. Among them were famous names: Athens, known for its culture and ideas, and Sparta, feared for its brutal warriors. But despite their strength, these city-states were divided. They fought each other more than they fought any outside enemy. Years of conflict had weakened them, and this division created an opportunity. To the north of Greece, a kingdom was rising, a land that many Greeks once looked down upon, Macedonia. But under the rule of one man, everything began to change. That man was Philip II of Macedon. He was not just a king, he was a brilliant strategist, a reformer, a man who understood that power did not come from numbers alone, but from discipline and innovation. Philip transformed the Macedonian army. He introduced new tactics: long spears known as sarissas, tight formations that moved like a single unit. His soldiers became more organized, more deadly than anything the Greek world had seen before. And one by one, he began to bring the Greek city-states under his control. Some were defeated in battle, others were forced into alliance. Slowly, Greece began to fall under Macedonian influence. For the first time in generations, the idea of a united Greek force was becoming a reality. But Philip's ambitions did not stop there. He had a greater vision: to invade the Persian Empire. At that time, Persia was the most powerful empire in the world, vast, wealthy, and seemingly unstoppable. It stretched across continents, from Asia Minor to Egypt and far beyond. Its armies were massive, its kings were powerful, and for many, the idea of defeating Persia seemed impossible. But Philip believed otherwise. He began preparing for war, gathering forces, planning an invasion that would change history. But before he could carry out his plan, everything changed. In 336 BC, Philip was assassinated. Suddenly, the future of Macedonia was uncertain. The kingdom he had built, the army he had trained, was now left in the hands of a young prince, a prince who was only 20 years old. Many believed the empire would fall apart. Greek cities began to rebel. Enemies waited for weakness. They thought Macedonia would collapse without its king. But they underestimated the man who would take his place, because that young prince was Alexander, and the world he was about to inherit was on the edge of something far greater than anyone could have imagined. Before he became a conqueror, before he became a king, he was just a boy, a prince, growing up in the shadow of greatness. His name was Alexander the Great. Born in the kingdom of Macedon, he was the son of a powerful ruler, Philip II of Macedon. But from the very beginning, Alexander was different. He was not interested in comfort. He was not satisfied with luxury. There was something restless inside him, a fire that refused to stay quiet. His mother, Olympias, believed he was destined for greatness. She told him stories of gods and heroes, of Achilles, the legendary warrior of Trojan War. She made him believe that he was not ordinary, that he was meant for something greater, and Alexander believed it. But belief alone was not enough. His father made sure of that. Philip was a warrior king, strict, demanding, unforgiving. He wanted his son to be strong, not just in mind, but in battle. So Alexander was trained like a soldier. He learned how to fight, how to ride, how to command. But the most important part of his education came from a man who would shape his mind forever, a philosopher, a thinker, a teacher unlike any other. His name was Aristotle. Under Aristotle, Alexander did not just learn about war, he learned about philosophy, science, medicine, geography. He learned how to question the world, how to understand it, how to think beyond the battlefield. And this is what made him different. Because Alexander was not just being trained to fight, he was being prepared to rule the world. But there was one moment, one story that would define the young prince, a moment that revealed who he truly was. One day, a wild horse was brought before the king, massive, powerful, completely uncontrollable. No one could ride it, not even the most experienced warriors. The horse would kick, rear, and throw anyone who came close. Philip was ready to give up. He ordered the horse to be taken away. But then, a young Alexander stepped forward. He looked at the horse carefully, not with fear, but with understanding. He noticed something others had missed. The horse was afraid of its own shadow. So Alexander did something unexpected. He turned the horse towards the sun, removing the shadow that terrified it. And slowly, calmly, he approached. The crowd watched in silence. No one believed what they were seeing. And then he mounted the horse. And this time, the horse did not resist. It obeyed. Alexander rode it as if it had always belonged to him. The crowd erupted. Philip, his father, was stunned, and in that moment he said something that would echo through history. "My son, you must find a kingdom large enough for your ambitions. Macedon is too small for you." That horse would later be known as Bucephalus, and it would carry Alexander through many of his greatest battles. But more importantly, that moment revealed something deeper. Alexander did not see problems the way others did. Where others saw danger, he saw opportunity. Where others saw fear, he saw a challenge to overcome. This was not just a prince. This was a leader in the making, a man who would not be limited by what others believed was possible. And as he grew older, that fire inside him only grew stronger, because Alexander was no longer just learning, he was preparing for a future that would soon test him in ways no one could imagine. The death of a king can destroy an empire. And when Philip II of Macedon was assassinated in 336 BC, that is exactly what the world expected. Chaos, rebellion, collapse. Because the throne was now in the hands of a 20-year-old, a young man with no real experience ruling an empire, a boy in the eyes of his enemies. That boy was Alexander the Great. The moment he became king, everything began to fall apart. Greek city-states that had been forced under Macedonian control saw an opportunity. Athens whispered of freedom. Thebes began to rise. Rebellion spread like wildfire. To them, this was their chance to break free, their chance to destroy Macedonian power before it could stabilize. But Alexander did not hesitate. He did not wait. He moved fast. Before the rebels could unite, he marched his army south, relentless, focused, unstoppable. City after city, he forced them back into submission. Some surrendered, others were crushed. But one city made a fatal mistake. They chose to resist. That city was Thebes. Thebes believed Alexander was weak. They believed he would not dare attack them. They were wrong. Alexander surrounded the city, and what followed was brutal. The walls were broken. The army stormed inside, and in a single devastating assault, Thebes was destroyed. Thousands were killed. Survivors were sold into slavery. The city itself was reduced to ruins. It was a message, a warning to the entire Greek world. This was no boy king. This was a ruler who would show no mercy to those who challenged him. After Thebes, no one dared rebel again. Greece was now firmly under his control. But Alexander was not finished, because ruling Greece was never his final goal. He had inherited something far greater, a plan, a vision left behind by his father to invade the greatest empire in the world, the Persian Empire. At that time, Persia was unmatched. Vast lands, endless wealth, massive armies. It was ruled by a powerful king, Darius III. To attack Persia was to challenge a giant. Many believed it was madness, that no army, no matter how strong, could defeat such a force. But Alexander believed otherwise. He began preparing immediately. He secured his borders, strengthened his army, gathered loyal generals who would follow him into the unknown, men who trusted him, men who believed in him. And then, in 334 BC, Alexander made his move. He crossed into Asia, not just as a king, but as a conqueror. Behind him was everything he had built. Ahead of him was an empire waiting to be challenged, an empire that had never truly been threatened until now. This was no longer about survival. This was no longer about proving himself. This was something bigger, a campaign that would change the course of history. Because Alexander was not just rising to power, he was about to redefine it, and the world was about to witness what happens when ambition meets opportunity. When Alexander the Great crossed into Asia, he was not just entering enemy territory, he was stepping into history. Ahead of him stood the greatest empire the world had ever seen, the Persian Empire, ruled by a powerful king, Darius III. Its armies were massive, its resources endless, its reputation unmatched. And yet, Alexander marched forward without hesitation. His army was smaller, outnumbered, far from home. But they had something Persia did not, a leader who refused to lose. The first major clash came near a river, a place that would test everything. That battle was the Battle of the Granicus. The Persian forces waited on the opposite bank, positioned, prepared, confident. Many of Alexander's generals advised caution. They warned him, crossing the river under enemy attack was too dangerous, too risky. But Alexander ignored them. He made a decision that would define his entire campaign. He attacked, charging straight into the river with his cavalry. Arrows rained down, spears clashed, water turned red with blood. It was chaos, pure chaos. But in that chaos, Alexander led from the front, fighting not behind his men, but beside them. At one point, he came within seconds of death. A Persian warrior struck him, nearly ending everything. But at the last moment, he was saved, and the battle turned. The Persian line broke. Their forces collapsed. Granicus was a victory, a powerful message to the world. Alexander was not afraid, and he was not easy to stop. But this was only the beginning. As he moved deeper into Persian territory, city after city fell. Some surrendered, others resisted and paid the price. Then came a battle that would shake the empire itself, the Battle of Issus. This time, Darius III was there in person with a massive army, far larger than Alexander's. The odds were overwhelming, but Alexander did not retreat. He studied the terrain, used the narrow battlefield to his advantage, and when the moment came, he struck, directly at the king, not the army, not the soldiers, the king. It was a bold move, a dangerous move, but it worked. As Alexander pushed forward, Darius began to panic, and then he did the unthinkable. He fled. The king of Persia abandoned the battlefield, his army left behind. And just like that, the impossible happened. Alexander had defeated the Persian king. But instead of chasing him immediately, Alexander turned south to Egypt, a land under Persian control. But when Alexander arrived, he was not seen as an enemy. He was welcomed as a liberator. The people celebrated him, honored him, accepted him as their ruler. And there, in the heart of Egypt, he did something extraordinary. He founded a city that would carry his name for thousands of years, Alexandria. But his journey was far from over, because Darius was still alive, and the final confrontation was still to come. It happened at Gaugamela, a battlefield chosen carefully by the Persians, wide, open, perfect for their massive army and their war chariots. This time, Darius was ready. Everything was in his favor: numbers, terrain, preparation. It should have been impossible to win. But Alexander was not fighting a normal war. He adapted, moved his forces with precision, created gaps, forced the Persian army to stretch, and then, at the perfect moment, he attacked. Again he aimed for Darius. Again he broke through, and once again Darius fled, for the second time. And this time there was no recovery. The Persian Empire collapsed. One of the greatest powers in history fell, and at its center stood Alexander, undefeated, unstoppable. But even after conquering Persia, he did not stop. He pushed further, into lands no Greek army had ever reached, through harsh deserts, across mountains, into the unknown. His men were exhausted, far from home, but Alexander kept going, driven by something deeper, something unstoppable. Victory was not enough for him. He wanted more. He wanted everything. And in battle after battle, against tribe after tribe, against army after army, the result never changed. He won. Every time, no matter the odds, no matter the risk, no matter the distance. He was never defeated, not once. This was no longer just a campaign. This was a legend being written in real time. Because Alexander was not just conquering lands, he was proving something. That strategy could defeat numbers, that speed could defeat size, and that one man could change the course of history forever.
After crushing the Persian Empire, after defeating Darius III, most men would have stopped. They would have returned home, celebrated their victories, ruled what they had already won. But Alexander the Great was not most men. For him, victory was never the end. It was only the beginning. Because even after conquering the greatest empire on earth, he still was not satisfied. His journey was not over. It was expanding. Before he chased the last shadows of Persia, Alexander turned toward a land of ancient power, a land of gods, of pyramids, of eternal history. Egypt. At that time, Egypt had long been under Persian control. Its people, tired of foreign rule, waiting for something to change. And when Alexander arrived, he did not come as a destroyer. He came as a liberator. There was no massive battle, no long siege, no resistance, because Egypt opened its gates to him, welcomed him, celebrated him. To them, he was not an invader. He was a savior, a man who had broken Persian power, and for the first time in years, Egypt was free. Alexander was crowned Pharaoh, a foreign king, now ruler of one of the oldest civilizations on earth. But Alexander did something that no conqueror had done before. He did not try to erase Egyptian culture. He embraced it, respected it, honored it. He visited temples, paid respect to their gods, and in doing so, he won the loyalty of the people. But one journey would change everything. Deep in the Egyptian desert, there was an oracle, a sacred place, a place where kings sought answers from the gods. Alexander made the journey, through harsh sands, through endless heat to reach it. And when he stood before the oracle, something happened, something that would shape his destiny. The priests did not just call him king, they called him the son of a god, the son of Zeus. From that moment, Alexander began to see himself differently, not just as a ruler, not just as a conqueror, but as something more, something greater. And with that belief, his ambition only grew. In Egypt, he also built something that would outlive him, a city that would become one of the greatest centers of knowledge in history. He named it Alexandria, a symbol of his vision, a mark of his presence, a legacy carved into the world. But even after Egypt, Alexander did not stop, because somewhere beyond the lands he had already conquered, there were still worlds he had not seen, still empires he had not touched, still victories he had not claimed. So once again he marched forward, leaving Egypt behind, not as a conqueror who passed through, but as a ruler who transformed it. And as he moved deeper into the unknown, his legend only grew. From a prince to a king, from a king to a conqueror, and now to something the world had never seen before, a man who believed he was destined to conquer everything. And so far, nothing had been able to stop him.
After years of endless victories, After conquering lands no army had ever reached, Alexander the Great stood at the edge of the known world. Behind him was an empire that stretched across continents, a legacy already greater than any king before him. But in front of him was something different. Not another empire, not another king, but the unknown, the edge of the world. He had marched through Persia, through Egypt, through deserts, mountains, and endless battlefields, and now he had reached India, a land unlike anything his army had ever seen. Strange landscapes, powerful kingdoms, and a new kind of enemy, war elephants. Massive, terrifying, unpredictable, creatures that could crush soldiers and break entire formations. For the first time, Alexander's army faced something unfamiliar, something that could not be easily outmaneuvered. But even then, Alexander did not turn back. He pushed forward, deeper, further, as if the world itself was not enough for him. Then came the Battle of the Hydaspes, a brutal clash against a powerful king, Porus. The battlefield was soaked in rain, the river swollen and dangerous, the conditions almost impossible. But Alexander found a way. He crossed the river at night, deceived his enemy, struck when they least expected it. The battle was fierce, long, exhausting. His army struggled, the war elephants charged, chaos spread across the field, and for once, victory was not easy. But in the end, Alexander won. He defeated King Porus, and yet, something unexpected happened. Instead of destroying him, Alexander showed respect. He asked Porus how he wished to be treated, and Porus replied, "Like a king." And Alexander honored that. He let him rule again, because for the first time, Alexander had met someone who reminded him of himself, strong, proud, unbreakable. But while Alexander stood victorious, his army felt something else: exhaustion, fear, distance. They had marched for years, fought countless battles, left their homes behind, and now they stood at the edge of the world, and they had nothing left to give. They refused to go further. For the first time, Alexander faced something he could not defeat. Not an enemy, not an army, but his own men. They would go no further, no matter what he said, no matter what he promised, no matter what he commanded. Alexander, the man who had never lost a battle, was finally stopped. Not by defeat, but by reality. For days he tried to change their minds. He argued, he inspired, he demanded, but nothing worked. And slowly, he realized the truth. Even he had limits. Reluctantly, he made a decision to turn back, to leave behind the lands he had not yet conquered, to accept that the world was bigger than even his ambition. And so, Alexander began the long journey home. But he was no longer the same man. He had seen too much, fought too much, pushed too far. And though he remained undefeated, this moment, this turning point, would define the final chapter of his story, because even the greatest conqueror in history could not conquer everything.
History remembers many kings, but only a few become legends. And among them, one name still echoes louder than most: Alexander the Great. He conquered lands no one had ever imagined, built an empire that stretched across continents, and led an army that followed him to the edge of the world. But perhaps the most remarkable part of his story is how quickly it all happened. By the age of 30, he had achieved what most rulers could not in a lifetime. And yet, his story did not end in battle. It ended in silence. In 323 BC, in the city of Babylon, Alexander fell ill. No great war, no final enemy, just a slow, mysterious decline. And then he was gone, at just 32 years old. The man who had never been defeated was taken by something no army could fight. His empire, the greatest the world had seen, had no clear heir, no strong successor, and almost immediately it began to fall apart. Generals turned against each other, territories broke away, and the empire he had built was divided. But even as his empire disappeared, his impact did not, because Alexander had changed the world forever. He spread Greek culture across vast lands, connected civilizations that had never interacted before, created a new world where ideas, languages, and knowledge began to mix. This era would later be known as the Hellenistic Age, a time shaped by one man's ambition. But his legacy was not just about conquest. It was about vision, about believing that limits exist only to be challenged, that the world is meant to be explored, and that greatness belongs to those who dare to chase it. Even today, thousands of years later, his name is still studied, still remembered, still respected, not just as a king, but as a symbol of ambition, of courage, of unstoppable will. Because Alexander did not just conquer lands, he conquered history. And in doing so, he became something more than a man. He became immortal. And maybe that is the greatest victory of all.